Somebody say something. Let me see if this thing is working.
Hello.
This thing.
I thought we were all supposed to be depressed during the rain.
Yeah.
I thought all of our behavior was determined by the weather. I don't know I don't know why I didn't get the memo.
Yeah. Well, you got to reframe that.
I'm not sure about that.
Sad on a sunny day.
I don't know. I like the frame. I like the frame. We're happy when it's sunny and we're sad when it's cloudy. And then we don't have to be responsible for anything else. Let's see who else is here. We got several people in the shroud of anonymity. They have muted themselves. And then we have a few people who are visible, such as Amir, Mariana, and Karen. Karen, how's life? On mute.
Yes, yeah, but they deleted like all of the pictures that they had posted.
Have you considered ending your friendship with them? Sending a text message saying, look, because of what you did, I can no longer keep being your friend. I'm really sorry, but we're just too different.
We don't have those same priorities.
You should do it. And then 10 minutes later, right, I'm just kidding. And see how they react, because they're probably gonna hate you forever. And now you have to tell them, dude, get over yourself. Have a sense of humor. And you can ridicule them for their reaction to your reaction. Yeah. And then you tell them, we all have different ways to grieve. Like you just tell them this is your reaction so that your reaction should be accepted too. Let me show you what I have. I have a few images that I wanna share about student loans and things of that sort. All right, so let me go to shared screen. Okay, first let me show you, go back to the issue of student loans, what we're talking about. I said in a previous class that one of the things that's happening that's driving deflation, the decreasing value of many commodities, is a credit bubble. And what I mean by a credit bubble is people are taking out tons of loans. They're using loans to buy cars that cost $70,000. They're using loans to buy houses that cost $400,000. They're using loans to get education that costs $120,000. The loans extract an ever greater percentage of your monthly income until eventually you have no money to go to Banana Republic and buy some clothing. So retail stores start to shut down because there simply are not enough buyers. Much of your income is already committed to servicing your loan, to paying interest. Your income is already tied up. So this is one of the factors that leads to deflation. I'll give you one example. I was at a Walmart in Puerto Rico about 4 months ago, and I saw a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi, and it said the price was 79 cents. That's the lowest a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi had ever been in my life. I'm trying to remember now, is it 2 gallons? It cannot be 2 gallons. What are these things? Does anybody know? Karen, do you know if a large bottle of Coke or Pepsi is 2 gallons or 2 liters?
I think
Karen,
it might be 3 liters.
I'm sorry?
I think it might be 3 liters. Aren't
3
the big
liters?
ones 3 liters?
The like normal bottles that
Yeah,
you
the
buy are
typical
2
one.
liters. 2 liters.
How much?
2 liters.
Okay, then I'm right in what I'm saying. Yeah, it suddenly sounded odd. But you know, most of my life, a bottle like that was $2 or maybe $1.59, or in a super special, $1.10. How can it be so cheap? That's not the case with every product. Some products have consistently been going up in price. One of them is college education. So there we do have inflation happening mercilessly. Year after year, college tuition has been going up. So this is a diagram from the from the Wall Street Journal, um, from a few years ago, around 2015, 2016, showing the problem. The problem is the following. Look at this yellow line. The yellow line represents credit card debt. It was going up, then it started going down, and then it went back up. The green line represents home equity loans. This other line that is also greenish represents car loans. And the steepest growth of any of these four kinds of loans is student loans, meaning whatever seems normal, like, oh, I think it's normal for me to pay 80,000 for a bachelor's degree. Whatever seems normal has not always been normal. The growth in student loan debt has been enormous. So the Wall Street Journal points out, back then, 43% of Americans who have federal student loans are not paying their loans. 43% are not paying their loans. And that's an understatement, as I'll explain in a moment. So look at how they break it down. They say there are some loans that are in postponement, meaning the person got permission to pay it later. Some are delinquent, meaning that they have not paid it for 1 month or 2 months or 3 months. And some are in default, meaning that they haven't been paid in more than a year, 360 days. They have not been paying them. But part of what's deceptive here is that we've broken down this failure to pay into 3 categories: default, delinquent, and in postponement. They're really one thing, and that one thing is known as these loans are not being paid right now. That's what it means. So we add 3 and 3 is 6, and 3.6 is 9.6, and we compare that to the 12.5, and that 9.6 is the 43%. By then, student loans became the second largest kind of debt in the United States. The largest kind of debt back then, and to this moment, is still mortgage loans. You can write down right now, student loans are around $1.5 to $1.6 trillion nationwide. That's the debt, between 1.5 and 1.6. Home mortgage loans are around $9.4 trillion. So people are still mostly being indebted by mortgages. But student loans are getting up there. So here we got one of the articles we looked at, Judith Scott Clayton, Brookings, 2018. Important to note again the date. This is not from the present. Looming student loan crisis is worse than we thought. Until 2016, average debt was $23,979. I'm going to compare in a moment what it is now. In a 12-year period, 27% of all borrowers defaulted. In other words, almost a third of college students who thought, I'm taking a loan, I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to be paying for my loan, found out instead they just cannot pay it, and they're just not paying it. It's worse at the for-profit private colleges. It's pretty bad at the public colleges. And Judith Scott Clayton points to the pattern, which is by 2023, almost 3 years from now, there will be 40% of people who simply, clearly, are not paying their loans, have not paid it for over a year. That's a bubble, meaning this is going to collapse at some point. This Ponzi scheme does not work. Let me see, there's a couple of comments here. Let me see if I can comment on them. If the government doesn't pay back its debt, then why should I pay my loans? I'm kidding, says Pablo. The subtle truth, Pablo, the subtle truth is you don't really have to pay back your loans. As Michael Hudson says, all loans that cannot be paid will not be paid. And the enormous majority of students who have taken student loans by, say, 2030 will simply not pay those loans back. It will be mathematically impossible. So whether you pay or not is simply a question of whether you will become part of the majority that's not paying for those loans. Now, it seems like I'm talking about the future. It seems like I'm talking about something that's going to happen eventually, that the majority of people will not be paying their loans. It's not a prediction, it is the present. Right now, the majority of people are just not paying their loans. What's interesting about journalism is, why are they unable to say that? I don't understand why they can't say it, but it's just true. The majority of students are not paying their loans, and I'll explain it to you as follows. You already saw what the Wall Street Journal was doing. They create three categories. One of them is people who are not paying because they have defaulted. Another one is people who have not paid because they are delinquent. And another one is people who have not paid because they are in postponement. That is, their loans are not being paid right now with permission. What they didn't mention is that there are other categories. For example, students who are in college right now are not paying their loans because they're in college. So that's another sector of students who are just not paying. There are other students who are not paying their loans because, say, the government is paying for them or their loans are being forgiven. But the fact is they're just not paying them. There are other students who are also not paying their loans because they are in deferment. That is, they have an official permission to pay it later. So when you add up all of these categories, all of them, you simply add up every category of student who has loans in their name. They've taken a loan. The majority of them, more than 50%, are just not paying them right now. That's happening right now. Yet this is not, it's not portrayed in the media. Isabella asks, what happens when you default on your student loans? Do you just never pay? Is that the same as declaring bankruptcy? It depends. When you default on your loans, what it means is you haven't paid for a long time. For example, you haven't paid for 15 months. That means you've defaulted. It means people who were expecting their money from you are starting to realize they might not get your money. So it's not the same as bankruptcy. It simply means that you're not paying and that you're a problem for the system. We have a question here from Christella. Christella, can you read your question? There's a myth going around that if you have student loans, you cannot eliminate them with bankruptcy. This is a super widespread myth. It's as if there were some law that says that if you have a student loan, you cannot have it be forgiven. You have to pay it because now you're enslaved by the system. I don't know how this got started. It's an interesting mystery. Somebody could consider writing about it. How did the story develop that you cannot go bankrupt with student loans? You can go bankrupt. If you declare bankruptcy, you can argue successfully in court that your student loans should be eliminated and forgiven. What happens, however, is that because the myth exists that you cannot and you will not be forgiven, then people simply do not hire a lawyer to go to court, bankruptcy court, and convince a judge. In other words, 99% of student loan borrowers do not argue in court that they cannot pay. They argue with their friends and with their family and with their bank, but they don't go to court. If you hire a bankruptcy lawyer, maybe $1,200, and if it becomes complicated, maybe it may be $5,000, maybe $7,000 or $10,000, but you can go to court. And from the 1% of student graduates who go to court to argue that they should not pay their loans because they can't, about 40% of them get their loan cut in half or forgiven entirely. They just have to prove in court that they are suffering unusual financial circumstances. that they simply cannot pay, which means the following. One, you've got to prove that you've really tried to pay. Look, I've taken loans, I've tried to get jobs, I've worked hard, I've paid what I can. I don't have enough money to buy anything. So you've got to prove that you've been very persistent in trying to pay your loan. And you've got to prove that this loan has caused you what they call undue hardship, which means you're suffering. You've got to prove in court that you're suffering. You manage to pull that off. All you got to do is convince the judge. And the judge can, and they do sometimes, eliminate student loan debt. Karen, can you read your question? There are many categories. One of them is to have a forgivable loan. You apply perhaps to the government to get your loan forgiven for special circumstances. Another possibility is that you have a sponsor of some sort, whether it's a corporation or a part of the government or a school, an educational institution that's willing to pay for part of your loan. So your loan is not just forgiven, it doesn't just disappear, somebody pays for it. But it's a good example, meaning that that's another sector of people who technically themselves are just not paying for their job, for their loan. Isabella, you have a question here. Read it. Parts. The question has two parts. First, what happens to you when you declare bankruptcy? The main thing that happens is that you cannot get any more loans. In other words, you cannot use credit cards, you cannot get car loans, you cannot get personal loans for several years. That's what happens. But the nice thing is your debts are wiped out. So in many cases, it's worth it. The person who bet money that they were going to get money from you lost their bet and simply is not going to get that money, and you get to start again in some way. The other part of the question is, what's the difference between default and bankruptcy, meaning what happens to you if you default? Once you've defaulted and in the process of defaulting, the banks and the whoever holds that loan product is sending you letters and emails. They might even be knocking on your door, telling you that you have to pay. They can take you to court to try to force you to pay. But generally, it does not mean that you're going to go to jail. Think again of how many millions of graduates, former college students have student loans. It just doesn't fit. They don't fit in jail. So if they all decided that they're going to create a union and they just don't want to pay any student loans, they would have complete power to just not pay anything, because the government doesn't have the means to make them pay. What they could do is, in the worst case, they could extract some money from your paycheck. If you continue to have a paycheck in some company, they can steal some of that money instantly without your approval. That can be ordered by a court, for example. Charles, can you read your question? Yeah, all you got to do is prove that you tried really hard to get jobs. You sent as many payments as you could, and you got to get a sympathetic judge, and your entire $200,000, for example, can be forgiven, and they have been forgiven. You can look up, if you Google this, you will find court cases where the judge says, I'm going to eliminate this debt. It's a myth that this debt can't be eliminated. People are so ignorant. Yes, you shouldn't have to pay 200,000. You're going to have to pay 100,000. All kinds of things happen. Nitant, you ask. Go ahead, Nitant. Read your question.
I asked, can you invest in student loans, like, or you can invest in mortgage-backed securities?
I really wish I knew. I don't know, but that's a hell of a question. I really don't. In other words, can somebody else buy those loans? I generally think the answer is no, because of the following. The problem of student loan inflation begins in the 1960s because in 1965, a new federal government program is created, which is called the Federal Family Education Loan Program. Write that down. Federal Family Education Loan Program. Federal Family Education Loan Program, known as the FFEL. That program consisted in guaranteeing student loans. That is, somebody takes a loan from a bank, the bank runs a risk. If you don't pay your loan, the government will pay for your loan and the interest. That's a government guarantee. By the 1980s, it's becoming clear that this is not the best strategy. In other words, now the government is on the hook to pay a bunch of student loans and a bunch of student loan interest that they don't have to pay. A better alternative for the government would be to just give you a direct loan. The government gives you the loan. So by 1992, a new kind of federal loan program is created, which is the direct loans. The direct loans, you're taking them directly from the government. And it had been mathematically demonstrated that in the long run, this is going to be cheaper for the government. Not everybody liked this. Some people thought that this is a problem because it leads to bigger government and it harms the private loan and business. So what they did is they said, we're going to have both programs, the guaranteed loans and the direct loans, but these two programs are going to compete against each other. In other words, we're not going to advertise to people. You cannot advertise to people that instead of taking a guaranteed loan, they can get a direct loan and that it has lower interest rate. Don't tell people that. Let them make the mistake. Take a guaranteed loan. You know, that way we all win. Private sector wins, government wins. This changes in 2008 with the financial crisis. President Obama and other people work on promoting direct loans so that this disaster known as guaranteed loans goes away. So by 2010, you can write, the Obama administration eliminates the FFEL program. It's eliminated. So since 2010, all new federal student loans are direct loans. They're not guaranteed loans. Charles asked the question, can we bet against the student loan market? Does anybody else want to get rich? I don't know if you can bet, but I bet you that people at places like Goldman Sachs and investment banks have found a way to bet a lot of money that college students are not going to pay their loans. Let's go back to the shared screen. I have several things to show. Okay, so I already pointed out that part of the problem is that in the future, 40% of people will not be paying their loans. But I'm trying to clarify that in fact, right now, more than 50% are just not paying their loans. The reason the media does not say that is because the media does not count people who are still in school, people who are having their loans forgiven, people who are in deferment, people who are in forbearance, etc., etc. Normally, we just want to think of a loan like a financial product that is offered to people, and people tend to say, well, nobody forced you to take a loan. It was your choice. You have to actually sign up for it. But if you look at the unequal impact, you see that 21% of African Americans who actually, 21% of African Americans who have student loans are defaulting. That means that they haven't paid for a long time, while only 4% of white students are defaulting. Looked from that perspective, it's really extraordinary. I'd love to see numbers about absolute counts of students nationwide by ethnicity who have defaulted on their student loans. If one looks at the loan by itself, one can say the loan is not discriminating against anyone. The loan is equally available. So there's nothing wrong with the loan structure. Loans are just available for whoever needs it. And then we ask, well, wait a minute, how come people of color are not getting jobs after they have their student loans? And then the critic would reply, well, there's nothing wrong with the loan. It's not the loan's fault. It's society's fault. Society doesn't want to give you a job. Maybe society is still racist. And if you have a student with the same preparation, but her name is Barbara Johnson and she's white, but you've got another student and her name is Barbara Reynolds and she's black, Reynolds has the same resume, but she doesn't get the job. And then we say, well, it's really society that's racist. It's not the student loans. I'm not satisfied with that. There's something really terrible happening here. It's almost as if then, if the loan is gonna be that less productive for a person of color, then the loan should somehow come with this warning. If you are a person of color, you are far less likely, 5 times less likely to pay back this loan, and 5 times more likely to end up owing far more money than you can pay back. Something like that would at least be informative. It wouldn't be fair, but it would be informative. So this is what I wanted to mention a moment ago when I said, look at that number, 23,979. That was the average debt per federal student loan in 2016. But look at what it was in 2003. In other words, from 2003 to 2016, the average student loan debt goes from 13,000 to almost 24,000. That is, it almost doubles. It almost doubles in just 13 years. Not just that, the net growth is basically $10,000. The net growth continues to be that big, but at a shorter span, meaning that from 2016 to 2019, the average student loan is at $37,000. This is crazy. This is insane. This rate of growth is unsustainable. This is just a complete disaster. And this is the sad thing. It was just, this is where you're living right now. You guys are paying, who knows, maybe $11,000 or $12,000 in tuition at UT per year, right? Anybody nod if anybody knows if the answer to that comment is yes? Does anybody know what you're actually paying for tuition? I'm looking, yeah, maybe Madison. Madison, do you know?
With what the loan is?
Madison, do you know what you're paying for college tuition per semester?
I think it's like 8 to 12 grand, depending on like housing and everything, dorms and stuff like that.
No. Yeah. Maybe you're counting loans in general, but all I'm asking for is tuition. Tuition cannot be 10,000 per semester. I'm sorry?
It's 10 for the year.
Yeah, 10 something. It's got to be 10 something for the year, maybe 10,500. But it also varies by college. So some colleges, it might be more.
As a Moody primary, I was paying $5,527 per semester.
That probably did not include fees, right?
That was what was directly taken out of my scholarship. So it was all fees paid directly to UT.
Yeah. All right. Now listen to this. Today, student loan debt is around $1.6 trillion. 45 million Americans have student loans. One of the largest growing sectors, quickest growing sectors is people over 60. They're going back to college and they're accumulating a lot of debt. More than 2 million student loan borrowers owe more than $100,000, and it's the second largest kind of student debt. Here's another chart from the Wall Street Journal. This one is from around 2017, higher education inflation. What matters first on the right chart is that what we were talking about last time, which is inflation, can be represented by this gray line, meaning the consumer price index or the inflation of ordinary goods like milk, sugar, etc. Meanwhile, you've got medical care that has been ballooning enormously. And far above that, we have college tuition rising immensely, rising just enormously. And that's since 1990. The chart on the left is less scary, meaning that the degree to which tuition is rising is diminishing. So that, for example, by 2017 or so, it was rising by around 2%, but it had risen far more, say, such that by 2005, it was around 8 or 10% in 2005. So this diagram here still shows that the rate of growth is positive. That means it's a problem, but it has been slightly diminishing. In other words, some universities are failing to keep enrolling more and more students. So the rate of growth of tuition is not accelerating in the way that it had been previously. So the question becomes now, the question is, why is tuition going up? That's the mystery. Why the hell is tuition going up? Anybody want to answer that question? Why is tuition going up? I'm trying to find the chat. Christella asked, let's see your comments. Christella asked, can't people just declare bankruptcy to get rid of their loans? Yeah, but you got to prove it. You got to prove it in court. You got to prove in court that you just can't pay it. And if you succeed, you make a really good argument, you're off. Karen, what about students who pay off their loans by teaching at underprivileged schools? We talked a little bit about that. Isabella, what are the consequences of declaring bankruptcy? You get to live a fine life after that.
Yeah.
Do Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 relate to student loan bankruptcy? The chapter laws do relate to student loan bankruptcy, but not specifically, meaning student loan bankruptcy is not addressed as a particular thing. These things, all you have to do, as with any other case in which you owe money to a creditor, somebody who lent you money, is you have to prove that you cannot pay it. So the same rules apply. The terms that I was kind of saying, like you have to prove undue hardship, you have to prove persistence of the problem, meaning this has been going on for years, you can't get out of it. You have to prove that you have made efforts to pay. Those are conditions that are common to any kind of bankruptcy. You just have to do it also for student loans.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's good. I think it's good practice. If I could advise people to file bankruptcy, I'd say do it. You know, you gotta, why not? You just have to do a bunch of job applications, fail at getting them. Imagine I've met people who tell me, this year I applied for 300 jobs and I didn't get a single one. That's great evidence for declaring bankruptcy. Can you imagine taking that as part of your file? Look, for 4 years, I've been applying to jobs and they don't even interview me. That's amazing evidence. So I would do it. I mean, the craziest stupid thing one could do, if you owe 100,000 or 200,000, I would say it's trying to pay it. It's not worth that money. So if you could somehow get out of it, you should get out of it. The problem is that we can't, because psychologically, we are programmed to think that our identity is tied up to our ability to pay a debt. We think that if we don't pay, then we're just not good people. And we think that civilized people pay their debts. So we try really, really hard. And this is, according to Michael Hudson, what bankers discovered around the 1980s or 1990s, which is poor people actually are very honest. And they're uneducated enough to think that they have to pay their loans. So they really try. Instead of just using the chapter laws to declare bankruptcy, which is what the chapter laws are made for, they're made so that you can say, look, the debt is too big, I can't pay it. Instead of doing that, they actually go ahead and they try to pay. Madison, go ahead, try to talk. What it means is that there is a greater lack of diversity in students of color in science and engineering fields. So companies are aware of it. So they are more likely to hire minority students who have a science or engineering degree. I knew a Mexican-American female student at UT Austin who told me that she was doing chemical engineering. And I asked her, what's your GPA? And she said, it's a C minus, but it doesn't matter. And I asked her, what do you mean it doesn't matter? She says, well, a lot of firms already want to hire me. And I say, why? Well, because I'm Hispanic, she said. So they feel embarrassed that they have so little diversity that in this case, sciences and engineering, it becomes a bit of an opportunity to actually be studying those fields. One more example I can say about that is in geology. If you have any friends who are 17 or 18 and are thinking of going to college, have them consider geology. Anything, even petroleum engineering. I mean, there is an incredible lack of diversity in geology and geophysics, and those are high-paying professions. So if I had to tell anyone who wants to get a job, oh, well, I think I'll go to law school or I'll go to business school. You want to make real money, you go to geology. And there are, enormous amounts of money, partly because of oil. So maybe now that the oil economy is collapsing because of OPEC, Saudi Arabia, and the coronavirus, maybe it's not the best time, but generally it is. Let's see some of the written comments. I called it, and many of you didn't want to believe me. You thought I was lying. You thought I was full of crap, but I called it. Let's see, what else? Any other thoughts? I had the question is this. The question is, why has student tuition gone up? Charles suggests bureaucracy, sports, alumni programs. Yes, that's part of the answer. Pablo says, is the cost of tuition increasing because state legislators are decreasing funding and school administrators are increasing their salary? Two parts. Is tuition going up because state legislators are decreasing the funding? The official answer is a huge yes. My answer is only sort of. Universities like to say that legislature and representatives in a government body hate education and they don't want to fund the university. So they're always cutting it back. And that's what I'm going to show now, how they try to argue that. But that's not the biggest factor. Mariana, the decreasing funding could be because of a larger budget deficit. Maybe there's less money in the government, so because there's less money, then education is being cut. Let's look. I'm going back to the shared screen. Shared screen. There we go. All right, why has student loan kept on growing? Why does tuition keep on growing? This is a diagram shared in several places by UT Austin to show students, parents, and donors why the price of tuition is going up. They say in 1984 to 1985, the state of Texas paid 47% of the cost for funding the University of Texas. That's what they say happened in 1984, 1985. And then they say by 2017, 2018, the state is only paying 12%. So if you look at these two diagrams together, which UT Austin features in some of its budgeting arguments, then what it seems to be showing is that the state government is constantly cutting away funds from our university so that, I don't know, so that maybe we become dumber and dumber. As I say at the bottom, this has a problem. The first problem is that there's an illusion. There's an illusion going on here. State pays only 25% of what it used to. That's an illusion. That's just not true. I'll show you that it's not true. The second problem is that tuition, allegedly, if we look at these diagrams, went up by 400% larger than it used to be. Look at tuition in 1984, it was 5%. And look at tuition in 2017, it is 400% of what it used to be. 400% of what it used to be. I'm going to show you that neither of these two things are true. So the first thing I want to show you that shows that these two things are not true is this number up here. 503 million was the budget for the University of Texas in 1984. That 503 is represented by the body of this Longhorn. But in 2017, the budget for the entire university was $2.9 billion. In other words, it is 6 times larger than the budget in 1984. So if the budget for this Bevo, this Longhorn, is 6 times larger, how come the two Longhorns have the same size? The answer is because the diagram is a misrepresentation. This is what the diagram should be. So I did this putting together to what extent would this larger budget by 2017, how large would it be if it's composed of 6 of these smaller budgets from 1984? So when you do it this way, you can now compare how much is the state paying in terms of just this orange rectangle compared to how much was the state paying in terms of this orange rectangle. Which of the two is larger? Which of the two is larger? And the answer is 12%. Of the larger one is 357 billion. 47% of the smaller one is 236 billion. In other words, the legislature, write this down, is paying more money for UT Austin in 2017 than it was in 1984. The story that they're just cutting and cutting and cutting, that's just not true. It is a fact. It's just not true. What's happening is that even though they're paying more money, so that it's now this enormous orange rectangle, these other sectors of the body of this Longhorn have grown enormously. Outside research grants have grown enormously compared to this huge green area. Ignore the numbers. The numbers don't mean anything here right now. Just look at the size of this green area with this green area. Look at the size of this gray area compared to this gray area. Every sector of UT has grown. So if we compare the growth of this middle sector, the state contributions, it seems to be smaller because this other sector, the research grant sector, has grown so much. All right, so now I have to undermine my own diagram and say that my diagram is deceptive. The reason my diagram is deceptive is because 1984 dollars are not the same as 2017 dollars. In other words, inflation. You cannot buy with $100 in 2017 what you could buy with $100 in 1984. So we have to adjust all these figures for inflation so then we can do a fair comparison. But bear in mind, I've already made the categorical point, which is there is more money being contributed by the state legislature, to the university, than there was in 1984. But now we adjust for inflation, and this is what we get. We get, this was the budget in 2017-18, this was the budget in 1984. It's a bigger Longhorn, but it's not as huge as the other one. So what we find is, adjusting for inflation, 2017-18, the state paid 64% of what it used to pay. The fiction that I mentioned a moment ago was that the state is only paying 25% of what it used to pay. It used to pay 47%. Later, it's paying 12%. 12% is about 1/4. That is 25%. That's fiction. Reality is it's paying 64% of what it used to pay. But the more dramatic thing that I want you to pay attention to is this issue about tuition. The gray sector is tuition dollars in the 1980s. The gray sector of the Longhorn is tuition dollars in 2017-18. And what we see is this sector is much bigger than that one. And now comparing these two, this small one here and this bigger one here, adjusting for inflation, doing all the steps mathematically, that is not looking at these numbers. These numbers don't mean anything right now. This 5 and this 21, they don't mean anything right now. I'm just doing an operation based on dollars. I'm just talking about the dollars. Tuition became 1,077% larger than it used to be. Since 1984 to 2017, tuition is more than 1,000% larger than it used to be. This is why what I mentioned in the original diagram is just an illusion, that 5 fits 4 times into 21. It's an illusion because actually this Longhorn that I'm circling right now should be much bigger. And when it's much bigger, we realize that it's not just 400% larger, it's 1,000% larger. So what does this mean? It means that tuition has grown far more than anything that the legislature has ceased to pay. Tuition has grown independently and far more than anything that happens in the Texas state capitol. And this is not just happening at UT Austin. This is a nationwide trend. This is what we saw. So the mystery becomes, why exactly is tuition being inflated so much? And one of the answers has been given by one of you, which is, well, there's a lot of programs that the universities provide, sports programs, administrative programs, student programs. A lot of administrators are being hired. There are all kinds of expenses that are being paid as universities are competing for students. That's one aspect. The other cause of the problem is the government. Because the government is subsidizing student loans or giving direct loans, it helps people who don't have the money. It helps them go to college. Now that more money is available, not only do you get one side of the output, which is students now go to college who previously couldn't go, but you also get another side of it, which is universities can charge more. They can charge more because now there's more money available. And that's what they've been doing. It's gonna burst, the bubble's gonna burst. The question is when. All right, any final comments or thoughts? You can speak if you wanna say it.
I have
If the government offers a guarantee, what they mean is go to Citibank and get a student loan. And don't worry, Citibank, don't worry, Citibank. If she doesn't pay, we will. That's a guaranteed loan. The direct loan is, instead of you getting the loan through Citibank, now the government has to spend a lot of money paying Citibank. Why don't we just get the money from the government? Federal Stafford loan or something. We go to the government and we say, hey, can you give me a student loan? And the government says, yeah, I'll give you a student loan at a low interest rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it means direct in the sense that the money is going directly from the government to you instead of the government giving money to the bank. Let me say one word about one of the readings, which I didn't mention, which is Michael Hudson's Killing the Host. The chapter is titled Finance as Warfare. The reason he mentions student loans a few times is because he's saying it used to be that in order to commit war, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What he means is there is inflation that happens during warfare. We saw it when we were looking at the US dollar and the inflation calculator. There is inflation that happens during warfare. He's saying instead of doing a war, we can get that inflation by turning to finance. In other words, we can get that inflation by creating student loans. We'll just create student loans and it'll be just as a surge of energy and financial pressure for growth into the economy, only that instead of happening because of a war, it's going to happen because of student loans. In other words, you don't just go to college and then get to be a hippie for 5 or 6 years. Instead, you go to college and now you got to work really, really hard so that you can pay off $120,000 for being at UT Austin for 4 years. 4 years of tuition, student loans, 4 years of tuition, 4 years of housing, 4 years of fees and books and food, and you end up owing, say, $120,000. So now it kind of puts this enormous pressure on the economy to produce. You're pressured to get a high-paying job so that you can pay back the loan, and if we look at loans as part of the gross domestic product, that is, the economy is being very successful, but one of the things that it has created is all these loans. All right, people, we're out of time. Any final comments or thoughts? Yeah, you don't pay your loan for 2 or 3 months. I think that's what it means. I don't think it means anything more than that. For example, it could mean that after the 3 months are over, you're going to have to pay more money each month, a little bit more to compensate for those 3 months. That's one possibility. Another possibility is instead of your loan ending 15 years from now, it'll end 15 and a half years. And now your monthly payment doesn't go up. But I don't know. I haven't analyzed it. It's interesting that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and other people are trying to use the Corona crisis to say we should cancel student loan. In principle, they're right. It can be done because this money that you owe is owed to these institutions that are super rich. So most of these institutions, whether it's the government or a private bank, nothing's going to happen to them if you don't pay your loan. They're going to be fine. So one could just say your loan doesn't exist anymore, forget it, which is what a judge can do for you as an individual. A judge can say your loan is gone, forget it, go home. The government can do that too. Anyone else? We're really over time. Do you go do that with friends? Because I thought basketball was one of those activities that's forbidden by the Center for Disease Control, because people put their sweat on the basketball and then you touch the basketball, you touch your face, and before you know it, you're spreading the virus.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We stay 6 feet apart when we're playing, so it's all good.
Do you make sure that you all do not touch the same basketball? You kind of have to.
Just make sure not to touch your face and you should be all right.
I'm not sure about that. I'm going to give you one horrible image. There's a Ben Stiller movie called, maybe it's the one about Polly, but he's playing basketball and there's a fat guy that has his shirt off.
Oh my
and is very hairy and sweaty. And at one point, the sweaty guy hits Ben Stiller in the face with his chest. And I swear, if the guy had a virus, Ben Stiller would have it. So you've gotta watch
Yeah.
out for that. It's because of that movie that I no longer play basketball. I can't
Well,
even
don't worry.
think about it.
There's a lot less contact than that, so just some
Is it?
practice.
I'm not sure.
What are you doing with your time today?
Well, I'm gonna create 2 videos, one about this class and one about the other class. And then I've got to prepare for 2 meetings that are happening tomorrow. And I'll go out at some point again. I'm probably gonna go bicycling in, who knows, maybe 30 minutes. I'll be outside so that I can see nature. Ladies and gentlemen, one of us has departed the meeting. I think that's a cue that the remaining 16 of us should end this before more of you keep rejecting us. Amy, know who it was? Let's look at the list and figure it out. It could be Amir. Is it Amir? He's gone?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it looks like we insulted him with the basketball thing. Let me write
Amir
something.
said his laptop died.
Amir, apologies about the basketball thing. See, like, the basketball thing. Play on. Play on. And don't let anyone stop you. All right, guys, take care. Have a good night.
Bye.
And it's gone. It's gone. Hang up. Do it. Do it. Hang up.